King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Australian giants of prog rock, psych rock, and whatever the hell else they feel like doing, have completed a colossal year of new releases with one double album, one previously unreleased record from last year, and then they just casually threw out an October trilogy of new LPs. These guys have barely been around for a decade and they're on their 23rd studio album. Now this year didn't quite match 2017's 5 albums of brand new material, but 2022 still totaled to a whopping 4 hours of newly released material. So I thought that since I haven't made a full-length video on these guys before, I would stop and rank all 5 new King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard releases from 2022, giving a brief review of each record and deciding which one is my favourite. Let's go. So coming in at number 5 is Made in Timeland, a funny little album that originally started as intermission music for their Timeland festival, but ended up expanding into a short album split into 2 15-minute tracks, all with the through line of a ticking clock sound which rhythmically interacts with the music in various different ways. This album is all over the place. I mean, that is quite literally how this album was put together. All of the different band members were working on their own kind of vignettes that got spliced together into these big pieces. The album allows them to delve deeper into instrumental electronic music than they've ever gone before. Some of the sections of these tracks have a kind of psytrance flavour to them, still managing to remain quite gizzardy. The way that this album keeps on twisting and turning and suddenly swerving into a whole different genre, a whole different tempo, does make for quite an engaging listen, quite a fun listen, but also one that, despite just being 2 giant tracks, ends up feeling like several shorter pieces with little to do with each other. Yeah, the ticking clock idea is quite cool, and it's a good exercise in polyrhythms and tempo changes, and it manages to make first track Timeland feel like it does have a fairly logical progression from start to finish, but in the case of Smoke and Mirrors, I don't think it's quite enough to make psych rock, hip-hop, and an early 90s underworld style beat sound like they came from the same universe. So yeah, it's quite an entertaining listen, and one that feels exploratory for King Gizzard. I think it's cool that it exists and holds its own little place in the Gizverse, but it is a pretty slapdash listen that I don't feel they spent all that much time on, or gave much weight in their overall discography. You should give this one a go, but it does feel like little more than a small oddity in the overall King Giz pantheon, so I think I'm gonna have to put it in last place for this year. And then straight after, we have the new sequel to Made in Timeland, which shares the same runtime, structure, and letters, which I only just realised somehow. Bet you guys can't wait for Slathered Unmown. But as opposed to Made in Timeland's distinctly electronic textures, Laminated Denim is rock music through and through, and I think a far more coherent listen than its predecessor. The first half or so of opening track The Land Before Timeland does feel a little bit slow to get going and gather momentum, but once Stu Mackenzie starts going teleportality and some more heavy guitar work comes in, I do enjoy the place the track ends up in. And then with second track Hypertension, it is just all downhill from there. In the good sense, I don't mean the quality goes downhill, I mean it's like getting to the top of a roller coaster and being dropped down. They just lock into a groove with a kind of krautrock style motorik beat, and it just keeps going and going and building layer upon layer of guitars, gradually snowballing into this unstoppable force. Yeah, the sounds, styles, and influences on display are really nothing new for the band, but this track does feel like classic King Gizzard at their drugged out best. So the main reason this is down at number 4 is because it's still just a 2-track 30-minute album, and because of its short length, the fact that Laminated Denim doesn't quite get off on the right foot in my opinion does end up detracting quite a lot from the overall experience of the album. It's a low stakes listen and nothing innovative, but Hypertension, though not for everyone, is such a sprawling and intoxicating intoxicating track that will more than satisfy long-term King Gizzard fans, meaning that even if primarily for its second half, this album will still have some strong sticking power for me, and I would definitely recommend giving this one a go. Taking the middle spot in this ranking, I have changes. Yummy, that's better. When this record was announced, my first thought was that the title and artwork were not really what I was expecting out of the band. I believe this is the first time that for their artwork they've just, like, taken a photo of themselves in a real-life place and not used any kind of fantastical imagery. And this is kind of reflected in the sound of the album, which is more grounded than what we're normally used to from King Gizzard. Some softer rock tunes with a similar lo-fi audio quality to Nonagon Infinity, and a kind of whimsical vibe to the whole thing. Bright, lush, and melodic like last year's Butterfly 3000, but in a different musical context. This is still the King Gizzard we know and love, with all their unique quirks. Starts off with a 13-minute track and keeps a lot of the obtuse and surreal lyrics we hear on most of their records. Apparently the aforementioned opening track was originally supposed to carry on into just like one giant piece that would be this album, but instead they came up with the concept of using the chord progressions from that track and sort of altering them into all sorts of different offshoots, which leads the album to feel very cohesive to listen to from front to back while not getting stale or repeating the same ideas. They may use the same series of notes and chords multiple times throughout different tracks on the record, but the way that they interact with the rest of the track is always slightly different. Maybe some of the tracks don't sound quite as striking as the band are capable of, and the opener has a bit of a similar problem to The Land Before Timeland, starting off a little bit meandering and taking a while to get going, but oh my god, that track ends well. It introduces a riff and a half around the 10-minute mark, which I was always glad to hear pop up again in various forms throughout the rest of the album. Changes is nothing too crazy or mind-expanding, but it's a really nice, tight, fun listen filled with lots of breezy bops and memorable tunes. Despite the fact that this band at the moment feel like objectively one of the hardest working groups in music, they still have a pep in their step throughout this album and are full of creative energy, which is a real joy to hear. And here we go from one of KG's most unassuming albums to date to the great, hulking, imposing colossus that is Omnium Gatherum. When this sprawling double album was announced at the beginning of this year with its Latin title and 80-minute runtime and album cover looking like an Atreides palace, my expectations for this album were set like right up in the sky. I genuinely thought this had the potential to gather together the vast array of diverse styles that they'd explored on previous albums, hence the title, and maybe even become the ultimate King Gizzard album. Now, first of all, I must of course talk about the lead single and opening track, The Dripping Tap, which is absolutely insane. An 18-minute psychedelic spectacle, which is the longest track that King Gizzard have made to date, and just like common consensus among the fans, including myself, one of their best. Top 5, maybe? Top 3? The structure of this track is like Lord of the Rings. It's like starts in this kind of relatively tame sort of R&B soul vibe, and then just balloons in scope until it sends you full throttle through one of the most epic journeys that the band have ever created. That was my second fantasy reference in the last minute. Now yeah, starting the album with an 18-minute track that is one of the best the band has ever created in their 23 studio albums sets the bar astronomically high for the rest of the album. And yeah, I was kind of mildly disappointed by the rest of what Omnium Gatherum had to offer, but mainly because of just how high my sights were set. It would have been a very, very difficult accomplishment to sustain that level for the rest of the album. But looking beyond that, there is a ton to enjoy on this 80-minute smorgasbord. As I'm sure I've demonstrated, the extent of the band's creativity is vast, with an unbelievably broad array of different genres and styles that they've explored in their career. And whatever your favourite mode of King Gizzard is, it is definitely on here somewhere, ranging all the way from heavy metal beasts like Kepler-22b and Gaia, to indie rock bops like Presumptuous, to the ambience of The Funeral, to unbelievably hip-hop for the first time ever on Sadie Sorceress and The Grim Reaper, which are both pretty well executed numbers. It doesn't have much logical progression from start to finish, or a narrative thread like you'd find on Murder of the Universe or I'm in Your Mind Fuzz. I can't say it's a consistent listen, but it gives you so many things to enjoy that I just have to put it up this high on the list. And honestly, with that unbelievable opening track, it is jostling for space with my number one pick. But they did release one album this year that just about did it the best for me, and that album is... Ice, Death, Planets, Lungs, Mushrooms, and Lava is one heck of a 7-part hour-long trip. It sees the band operating on an uncompromisingly jammy and expansive level, but despite it not being the tightest or most carefully thought through listen, there is like hardly a single moment on this record where it wasn't holding my attention. It is so constantly, gleefully strange. The band here are clearly having a great time doing only exactly what they want to do, even if said thing is cheerfully singing a line like, "I'm a mushroom, okay? I spread like lava, rise like bread, paralyzed agaric fungus." No, seriously, I love how deep this band goes into absolutely bizarre, insane concepts on this album. I managed 90% of the time to keep these really expansive pieces engaging, with a synergy and a sense of being one unified musical force that reminds me of, I don't know, a krautrock band like Can. The two biggest highlights on here for me would probably have to be Ice 5, a 10-minute funky jam, so good that I even played it in a social setting and everyone enjoyed it somehow. And also Iron Lung, which pops off harder than even like most of the tracks from Infest the Rat's Nest. I was like listening to this track on the London Underground and really trying not to like grin from ear to ear. I should also mention that each of the tracks on this album is actually based off one of the Greek musical modes, which makes the album's ludicrously long title make a little more sense, not that it mattered anyway, and also just ties the whole thing together really nicely, as well as adding an extra bit of musical intrigue. Maybe it's not one of their best albums overall in their enormous discography. There's a couple of moments, like on Glee's 710 and Hell's Itch, where I did feel the length a little, the latter of which has some icky lyrics which, however intentionally, do get under my skin. Pun intended. But the overall experience of listening to this album front to back is such a wild and strange adventure. It feels like it could have been made by nobody else but these brilliant madmen. And for that reason, Ice, Death, etc. is my favourite King Gizzard album of the year, which is actually something you say with these guys. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's video, another new little idea I've had. If you guys enjoy this, I'll also consider making more Gizzard-related videos in the future. But for now, thank you for watching. Yours microtonally, Joey.